are here in Hood River, Oregon, which is about 37 miles west of Dufur. It is beautiful here and a little bit windy. We're going to catch stuff off the table here. And we are here to talk about grains and other crops that folks are purchasing. We've had a lot of new customers join us, some who are just starting with buying bulk products right from the farm, and some who are starting to mill their own flour. And so we have a lot of questions that have come from customers. And so here on Founder Friday for August, we're going to talk about some of the questions that customers have. So David's going to talk about, we have a couple examples of things on our table here. Grains, why grains may have variations in colors, why they may, a hard white wheat, for instance, may be a little plumper from one farm and not as plump from another, why there may be color variations in lentils, maybe some agricultural debris, why you may see that, and how to really work with those grains as you're receiving them and using them in your own home. So David, would you like to just kind of start sharing about wheat and other crops that we have at Azure, and then what a customer can expect when they're getting those from us?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So as far as wheats and grains of all sorts, there is going to be naturally a certain amount of variation. So if you look at this bag of wheat, and I don't know if we can see it quite that good, but some of them are a little bit darker and more shriveled, and some of them are a little bit plumper and lighter. And so the question is, is this like mixed with soft white wheat or something? This is actually hard white wheat here. And the answer is no, this is hard white wheat. I'm never going to say that there would never be a mixed in soft white or some other variety, but that's as highly unlikely in this case. The difference is where in the field this was grown, or from field to field it can vary even more. So the more moisture that the crop has right after bloom, the more plump the grain is going to be and the lighter in color. The darker the color is, the more shriveled, which they tend to go together, means that crop was stressed for moisture. So there was not enough moisture that as the crop would like, but there was enough to take it to maturity to create a good grain. A lot of times, and there isn't really a right and wrong answer on which has more nutrients or whatever, the shriveled grain typically has a little bit higher protein content. The less shriveled grain typically has a little bit higher vitamin and fiber content. But they're going to work very similarly in the bread. So if you make bread out of one or the other, if it's a lot of shriveled, you're going to not need like any extra gluten or dough conditioners or anything like that. If there's less of that, you may want to use maybe a little bit of vital wheat gluten or something like that to make your bread have the same texture if you're going for a consistent texture. But that's the difference, and you'll find this in all four major varietals of wheats that we do. You'll find this in soft white, you'll find this in hard red, and you'll also find this in durum. There's going to be variation. This one's a little bit more radical than most, but that's because they obviously had high spots and low spots in the field. So that's...
So David, on this, on the grain, for example, this hard white wheat, there are also times where it looks a little, like you said, a little more plump or maybe a little smaller kernel of grain, and that's because this one had more moisture, so this one looked a little bit more plump.
Yeah, this mostly is fairly plump kernels for hard white wheat, and so it probably finished in either a higher rainfall area or in a place that had, fairly good moisture at least to bloom. And it probably didn't get a super hot spell late in the season. That's another thing that can change that. So if you were to get, say, a mid-June 100-degree spell, it's gonna shrivel your kernels. There's no two ways about it. It just happens. It's
So
and it decreases the yield. So farmers don't like that, but it will make you have a little bit higher protein content wheat.
So we've kind of seen that out here this year, right? We've had a hotter season in the summer and earlier than normal, and so we've seen some of that here this year.
We'll be seeing a lot more shriveled kernels. Very little looks like this. Now, ours did not get affected that much by it because, with organic practices, the soil holds moisture better. But the conventional farmers, a lot of those guys had such shriveled wheat this year, and it got such high protein content for soft white that the elevator is docking them huge amounts because it's too shriveled. So they're not getting full price for their grain this year, and they were down on yield as well. So it was a bit of a hit for a lot of guys. But for, as far as bread baking within the organic world, ours was, it was in good shape for anything you'd want to make out of it. We didn't have, there's a few shriveled kernels where it gets really low and rocky, but for the most part, it was a very solid year as far as grain goes.
Now, David, we have had a few questions too about whether it matters, whether it's winter wheat or it's spring wheat. We get that question quite a bit. Does that matter when it comes to? Is there really a difference when it comes to nutrient content and things like that?
So the quick answer for that is no. It doesn't make any difference. But it does make a difference if you're planning to grow it. So a winter wheat you would plant in the fall. In the northern hemisphere here, you would plant a winter wheat in usually September or October, and it has to have a freeze. It has to have a cold spell in order for it to go into growth mode. It's never going to grow and mature if it doesn't have that cold spell. A spring crop, a spring variety, does not need that cold spell. So you can plant that in the early spring. If it freezes a little bit, it's okay, but you don't want it to freeze too much because it's very winter sensitive. So it can't take the frost. So if you're doing something like, growing wheatgrass, it might matter, or if you want to use it as a cover crop, you definitely, for those things, you'd probably want a winter wheat possibly. But, you hear a lot of people say, oh, you want to definitely have hard red winter wheat for bread. No, hard red spring wheat tends to have a little bit higher quality in general than hard red winter wheat. Just saying, as far as for bread baking qualities. But they're both going to be very comparable. You can have poor quality spring, very high quality spring, poorer quality winter, very high quality winter, and you could cross those over, and I could bake bread out of them side by side, and I could challenge you to tell the difference. It would be impossible to tell the difference. There is no physical difference from a baking quality or characterization between spring and winter. Not near as much as there is between high moisture or a hot spell during the late growing season. Not near as much.
So if I understand you correctly, really, it's just whether it's spring or it's winter, it's just really dependent on when you're planting it, not necessarily affecting nutrient content of that grain.
That's right. It's the variety of the cultivar and when it's expected to be planted. Does it need a chill or doesn't it? Okay. And that's typically winter wheat. When you have a chill, it starts growing sooner in the spring before you can get a tractor in on the mud. And so a lot of times in a really low moisture area, you get a better yield on winter wheat because it can start growing sooner in the spring. That's the reason for winter wheat. Otherwise, everyone would probably do spring wheat.
Sure. Well, thank you. I appreciate you clarifying that, because that is a question that we get often, and we want to make sure that everybody understands truly what that means. Now, sometimes, David, we have things like little pieces of agricultural debris that shows up in some grain, whether it's what we call vetch or weed seed or a little bit of chaff. Could you kind of share why that happens, and is that pretty common when it comes to raw grains?
It is common, and as a processor, obviously it's our job to try to get that out.
Sure.
So vetch, we can start with vetch. Vetch it's in the pea family. It's a small black seed that's almost absolutely identical in diameter to a grain of wheat. Normally when we're cleaning, and it's of the same gravity density. So the two things we use primarily in cleaning wheat is gravity density, which will take out things like these wild oats typically, or size, which will take out straws, pieces of grasshopper, things like that might be in the wheat. But vetch, unfortunately, is exactly the same gravity and exactly the same diameter as wheat. So the wheat falls through a little hole, so anything big comes out, or anything too small can fall through a different hole on the screen. So we take out anything too small or too big, and unfortunately vetch is exactly it doesn't hurt anything except it makes little black specks in the flour, and it is pretty high protein. It's a very high protein pea. In fact, they used to use it a lot as a protein source, but it turns out that vetch also has a appetite suppressant quality in it. So if you eat a lot, and obviously a few grains in your wheat isn't going to do anything whatsoever. But if you were to eat, big bowls of vetch soup, it would actually make you not feel very hungry. So many times it's been used, vetch is actually an ingredient in a lot of weight loss products, crazy enough. But the issue with vetch is when it's in the wheat, looking like that, many people tend to think it's mouse droppings, because it's black and it's about that size. It's not. It's hard. If you were to squish a mouse dropping, it would powder in your fingers. Vetch is very hard, and it's white in the dead center. So if you were to crack it open with a hammer or bite it real hard if you have strong teeth, it would be white in the center, or light colored. It's just very dark on the outside shell. So, and the vetch is in organic grain a lot. Unfortunately, it's a very, very common thing to be in organic grain, because organic farmers use vetch as a legume. It's a very good legume in the sense that it fixes a lot of nitrogen out of the air. And so many farmers have used this as a cover crop. The downside to vetch is when they use it as a cover crop is it does not all mature at one time. So they use it as a cover crop, maybe cut it for hay or till it down. Every once in a while there's going to be a few that come early, and they mature before they till it down as a cover crop, or before they're going to cut it for hay or whatever's happening, and it reseeds itself. So then the next year when they're planting wheat in that field, using the nitrogen and the nutrients that the vetch fixes in the soil, there's a few volunteer vetch plants. And every one of those gives a whole handful of seeds like that. And it actually doesn't take very many seeds to make a really visual difference. One time I went through a 2,000-pound tote of seed. We had some special seed that we could not, we couldn't replace. It was irreplaceable. Unfortunately, there was vetch in it, and we did not want to spread vetch to new fields. So we took and we set that tote up and we ran it down like a plywood slide very slowly, and it looked like it had a lot of vetch in it. There was, it was smattered throughout. And we hand-picked 2,000-pound bag of wheat, picked all the vetch out. And in the end, I thought, we'd get a lot of vetch. In the end, when we actually hand-picked every single vetch seed out of that was smattering throughout, we had 4 ounces of vetch seed in a 2,000-pound tote, because it's black and it shows up like crazy. Yeah. And it's pretty small, it's the same diameter as wheat. The only way you can get it out in cleaning equipment is a very expensive cleaner called a color sorter. And a color sorter actually singulates the grain into a single file, runs it down all these little channels. It has an electric camera eye on it, and then if that comes over past the eye, there's a little slot, and they spurt air up and blow the off-color seed out. And right now at Azure, we do not have a color sorter. That is on our wish list. We want to get one someday, but we're not set up. It's a very large piece of equipment because you have to singulate all those, so it's pretty wide. We just don't really have any place to put it right now, even if we were to buy one. So we are working on a cleaning upgrade at the mill. We will be building a new building to put our cleaning equipment in, the spelt huller, hopefully a color sorter. We have an indent and a gravity sorter that'll all go in there, as well as a clipper, which is what I described to you before with the little holes and stuff. And so we're hoping to get all that in, but we're probably 10 months to a year out on having that up and running at the mill. Some of this we do not always clean, but everybody has the same problems. It's not just us. This usually, so this is some field debris. Most of this, some of this is little stems and cobs, which is the center. Wheat grows on a stem about so long, and in the middle of that is what's called the cob. The cob is a stiff piece of straw that the actual grain anchors to. So there's some cob in here, and every once in a while, it's usually lighter than wheat, so using the density, we can usually get it out. But if there's a lot of it in there, every once in a while, a little bit of it slips by. The other things that are in some of this example that Karen brought anyway, that people have been asking about, believe it or not, there's actually wild rice in this one, which usually doesn't happen much in Oregon, but that's a big thing in Minnesota. They have a lot of wild rice that goes along the edges of the field. Another one that there's a bunch of in here is actually wild oats. Wild oats is a thing in Oregon. We do get a lot of wild oats. So oats obviously is a major seed crop. There is a variety of oats that goes wild, and it shells out like vetch. It shells out a little early, but the earliest seeds on the plant will shell out and fall in the field. The rest of them, when you cut the grain, will go into the combine hopper along with the wheat. So that actually is a bit of a problem. Also, the bulk density on oats is different, so we can usually get that out through bulk density. It has a hull on it. It's a little bit lighter than wheat, and it's usually relatively easy to get out. But sometimes, again, when there's a lot of it, your screens just get overwhelmed going over the top, because this will come out over the top and blow out. And when there's a certain amount of it, sometimes a couple of them will stick together or something and it'll fall in. So that's what happens here. And again, as we move forward into higher quality cleaning equipment, that will get better. But right now, that's definitely a thing that we have to deal with. It's oats. It has a hull on it. If you're grinding the flour, you can grind this in. It's no big deal. If you get a little husk, a sifter takes it out really easily. If you're using this fresh, you're wanting to eat it like cracked wheat or something in cereal. It tastes like a hull in the oats or something, because it is. So, we will be working, our cleaner upgrade will get this a lot better when we get there. But wild oats, again, they're not dangerous. There's nothing, wild rice, obviously, that's a more expensive grain. But, you can get that. There's also a little bit of smart wheat in here. Another thing so obviously a lot of this was not from our farm, because we don't have smart wheat on our farm. That's what these little brown ones are here.
Okay.
But it's a very common weed in the Midwest. And when you're not spraying, things like vetch and smart weed are very easy to get out with selective herbicides like 2,4-D, which is Agent Orange. That's what the conventional guys use to get rid of that out of the field. They throw on a selective herbicide, and they have all different names for it, like Clearfield and different things. But basically, it all boils down to one ingredient. It's actually called 2,4-D, and that is the active ingredient that was used in Vietnam in Agent Orange. So if you hear about those folks that heck, I would much rather in my food have a little bit of smart weed and vetch than the effects that people that came back from Vietnam had from Agent Orange.
Yeah.
I just as soon not have Agent Orange on my food. And so, when you're dealing with organic food, it is harder for an organic farmer to keep their field as clean because we're not using those herbicides, and that's the particular one that you would use for that, but not using those herbicides. So it makes it a lot more of a challenge, and a lot of times there's a lot more of this stuff in organic grain than you would find in conventional.
Yeah.
But it's in all grain. Every grain is going to have a little bit, and it's going to have to be, we run it through cleaners to clean up.
So sometimes we also see, a deformed wheat kernel, right? So maybe some little smut or, what's the other? Ergot. And I know that sometimes customers will say, well, I've read that that's dangerous, and it was in with my wheat. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So smut and ergot are both diseases that come in grain. Ergot you very seldom see in wheat, although it can happen in wheat, but it's extremely common in rye.
Okay.
Rye is very susceptible to ergot. Some of the older varieties of wheat are also susceptible to it. It's a fungal disease that gets in the soil, and it comes up and it attacks the grain when it's almost mature. And then so it makes a black either kernel or a half a kernel. Sometimes it makes the kernel a little bit deformed. And then when you combine, it blows up and it goes out and it seeds itself back in the field again for next year. So it is a fungus. It is in the same family as molds and those things, but it's dry. It's never been wet. It's not a wet mold. It's a dry fungus. Funguses, are not ideal. If you were to eat a tremendous lot of ergot, there are things that, it's not ideal for health to do that. The, one or two grains in the rye, in your rye bread, if you were to grind that with the rye and not get it picked out, would be irrelevant to health in any way. Or even up to, I think the standard is 99.5% non-ergot, so up to 0.5%. So that's one grain in roughly 200. And they just recently changed the standard to 99.9 non-ergot. So that would be roughly 1 grain in 1,000.
Okay.
But I have never seen ever grain that was infested anywhere close to that level. And that's
so kind of to your point, like when you were doing the veg, it looks like it's an enormous amount, but as you start picking it out, you realize you have 4 ounces.
Yeah, there was 4 ounces in that whole tote when it was pretty colored. You know,
Right.
it had a pretty good smattering. And ergot is similar because it tends to make the kernel either half or all the way black, depending on how bad it was.
Sure.
Rye tends to look more of a kind of a green-brown color anyway. And so then you add that ergot in there and it really makes, it shows up very obviously against that green-brown color.
So I'd imagine the goal is, there's no way to get everything potentially out of like all agricultural debris or ergot or vetch. It sounds like it's not easy to get it all out. So
it's not easy to get it out. There's ways we can do better, and we are committed here at Azure Farm to get better. And we even have a lot of the equipment ordered. We are in the process. We've already poured concrete on the new area to put our cleaning equipment. But we have a warehouse going up, and I was planning to use the same crew that's putting the warehouse up. So they're not going to even get started on that building until the warehouse is up. So we do have a little delay there on the cleaning because the cleaning is not near as critical as the warehouse.
Well, why can't you just wash the grains?
Wash the grains. That's been a question I've been asked quite a few times. Can we wash the grain? Some grains, like lentils, at the consumer level, it's not a bad idea to wash it. You can wash them, get any dirt off, whatever. Wheat, don't ever even think about washing it unless you're going to dry it in a dryer. So if you want to sprout it, and there's definitely a school of thought that sprouted grain is better, and I can give you both sides of that argument. But sprouted grains are, I have nothing against sprouted grains. There's a good argument for that happening. But if you do use sprouted grains or you sprout them yourself, do not let them sit wet for very long. Make sure that as soon as you get that nubbin, that you dry them back down quickly. Otherwise, you will actually get molds that are dangerous. Unlike ergot and smut that are dangerous only at very high concentrations, wet grain mold is dangerous at much lower concentrations. So make sure if you're going to wash it, I do not have the ability to wash grain. We don't have a way to dry it fast enough, and I wouldn't even think about doing it. And usually nobody does. Nobody really washes grain. If you're cooking grain, you can wash it. If there's any of this stuff in it, if you're going to cook it right away, this will float out. So it's very easy to get out through floating if you're going to cook grain for cereal. I had an aunt who used to cook wheat all the time. Just took wheat like this, put it in a pot and boiled it kind of like rice. And we had cooked wheat for breakfast almost every time at her house. And it's actually pretty good, not bad. It's not, not a bad cereal. Put a little, cinnamon and milk and raisins in it, and it's pretty good. But, so if you're using wheat for something like that, that's, you can float it out that way. But do not leave wheat wet long, please. Lentils, beans, rices, anything that you're going to cook, wash it. It's no problem. You can wash lentils. It'll wash any dirt clots out, anything like that.
Look for stones, right?
Yeah, if there's stones. In lentils and beans grow very low to the ground. So when you're using a combine, you're having to harvest almost right on the ground. Some of them, they actually even undercut. So you actually cut them slightly under the surface of the ground, and then you rake them into a windrow right on the ground, and you pick them up with a bale hay pickup into the combine. And it's very easy in those situations to get a little dirt clod or little itty bitty rocks into the beans or lentils. And so, that is not super uncommon. We use what we call a destoner on all of this stuff. And basically it's gravity. So anything that has a denser bulk gravity than the grain, it will pull out. And it does pull out almost all rocks. Occasional exception to that, there's certain volcanic rocks that are a little lighter that it's really hard to get out. There's also certain dirt clods. So you get a little dirt clod in there that's just comes up just the right density. Occasionally that'll get in. So it's always a good idea to wash, wash lentils and beans before using them.
Yeah.
Most packages even say that.
Yeah.
Raw agricultural product, wash before cooking.
And pick out any debris. I actually just got a bag of beans, a small bag of beans from the grocery store the other day. Normally get everything from Azure, but had to stop and get some beans. And it had a statement right on the back of that bag. Despite the use of modern cleaning equipment, there may still be small pebbles and debris. Please wash and remove debris before cooking or something like that.
Positive side, so going through this, the positive side is that when you're seeing these weed seeds and some of this debris, these weed seeds, if you're seeing them in there, they didn't use herbicides, guys. You don't have the invisible toxins that you can't pick out. You can pick out that stuff. You can't pick out Roundup. You can't pick out 2,4-D. You can't pick out these fungicides that are used to make smut not happen or ergot not happen. They can't be picked out. Those fungicides are 100 times more dangerous than smut or ergot, and those herbicides are way more dangerous than a little bit of vetch or smartweed or some of these things. So remember, when you're getting raw agricultural ingredients, and obviously it's the cheapest way to eat. We eat that way in our family all the time. Guess we've gotten less picky about that, but we watch it. Usually in grain we don't. We just grind it and eat whatever's there. But as far as the the beans and stuff, we'll rinse it, put it in the colander, run it around a little bit. If you're seeing some dirt wash out, watch for that dirt clod. Shake it a little bit. The rock will usually always go to the bottom. Just check it, check it out before doing that. But I feel pretty good about that because I know that I don't have the invisible toxins in there. This is the stuff that we can get out. And as I say, Azure will be working on getting better and better at getting it out mechanically, but we will never get it out with chemicals.
Thank you so much for sharing that and explaining it. We hope that we've been able to answer some of those questions for you. If you have additional questions, as always, please reach out to our customer care team at info@azurestandard.com.
So we have one question.
Oh, we have a question. Well, I guess we're going to grab that real quick. What about the huge amounts of debris that we are finding in our wheat berries? Not like a few pieces, but a handful will be 10% plus amounts of rocks and debris. I had to toss a ton of to the chickens because I didn't have time to sort it all.
So that was on us for quality control. We had a load of wheat, hard white wheat come in.
It was.
Unfortunately, and I take responsibility for this because this was on us. But the vendor sold it to this. We did not clean that in our facility. The vendor sold it to us as cleaned grain, and it came to us uncleaned. It was marked cleaned on the tags, and so our crew at the packaging facility went by the tags, what it said, and they ran it through the baggers. The baggers are all enclosed. They don't really see it unless they open up a bag and actually look.
Yeah.
So, which we should do. We should have done that, and that's on us. We missed the quality control on that. It was unclean. It's just the way it came out of the field. So unfortunately, there was about 40,000 pounds of that lot that got away from Azure. There's nothing dangerous in it. There's nothing poisonous. There's nothing that doesn't come in your wheat all the time. But normally it goes through our cleaner or somebody else's cleaner. In this case, it was supposed to have gone through a cleaner at another facility that was close to the farm where it was raised. And hopefully that won't happen again. We are working on putting better quality control into place so that doesn't happen. I do know the lot that is being referred to there.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
And it's all the one lot. And it was this load that came in that was not raised on our farm. We don't raise a lot of hard white on our farm. We do a lot of soft white. We do some hard red. We do a lot of einkorn, spelt, things like that. But hard white is not something we raise typically because we have a little bit too good a growing season for hard white. It needs to be stressed a little bit more. We're in too good a wheat growing area for that particular crop. So we buy that in usually from Idaho. And there was an error that we should have caught and didn't.
Yeah.
So.
And it took a few of you letting us know, and we were able to take a look at that and say, oh, yeah, it said it was clean, but perhaps we see now that it wasn't.
We'll be very careful with that vendor in the future. That won't happen again, at least not from them.
Yeah. So thank you for that question. We appreciate it. And we're always on a mission to have constant improvement. Right?
The other thing is, she said it was 10%. The what happens with wheat when you put it in the totes, the chaffy stuff will kind of work its way towards the top. So the first bags that come out of that won't be too bad. Mm-hmm. And then the further you get towards the top, the worse and worse and worse it gets.
Yeah.
And the very last bag that empties out of that tote is the 10% bag that she was just describing. So
yeah, and you're right. I've helped bag some at the mill a few times, and it's up in a hopper. You stick the bag up and seal it, and you don't really see what's in the bag unless you stick your head down in the bag to look at it. So
that's right.
But yes, we are in a constant state of improvement, working on process improvements, and so thank you for that, and we appreciate that question. One of the things here is that we always want to be transparent with you, and so we're not here. We don't want to hide anything. We want you to know if there is an issue, we will work on it and find.
We will work on it. That was quality control on our side. Our team believed the tag, and we should never do that.
Yeah, and we all did. We all believed the tag. So it took a second to go look and go, well, wait a minute, it should be that way. And then okay.
But unfortunately, about 40 out of the 60,000 pounds got away. We did clean up the last of it, but we had about 40,000 pounds.
Yeah, that went before we realized it. Yeah. So thank you again. Were there any other questions? Oh, there's 2 more questions. Okay. Well, could you tell me what that question is?
Is best suggested storage for home pantry use?
For home pantry use of what? Grains?
Just I think it's in general.
Okay. So the question is the best suggested storage for home pantry use for grains.
Grain. And any grain will keep almost indefinitely, truly, as long as it's kept cool and dry. And I want to emphasize dry as first. It can even get warm, and it'll still be good. If it gets warm incrementally, like in summer and winter. Dry, and dry. If you put it in a sealed bucket, it starts. Don't let any moisture get in it first. I've had people say, "Oh, I put it in a bucket." Well, when did you put it in? Well, we had it there in our basement for about a month or 2 before. What was your basement? Yeah, it's kind of damp down there, but it was in the bag. Guys, paper absorbs moisture. It goes into the grain, and then you dump it in the bucket, and it's got moisture content that's above. When we ship out, we test every single batch for moisture content. Do not try to store any grain, wheat family, corn can be a little higher, but do not try to even think about storing it if it's got more than 11% moisture, period, end of story. Don't even try. It will, it'll store for a while, but you will have problems. If you can keep that moisture percent below 11, ideally below 10, you are going to be in good shape. That will store and keep keep it in a place where insects can't get to it.
Right.
There are moths that will come, and that's why I say cool, because moths typically only fly in heat.
Right.
So if you can keep it cool and dry, it is good indefinitely. I have had wheat. In fact, I just grabbed some wheat out of a jar that I had when I was 14 years old. I went and got some special varieties of wheat, and I had stored a little bit of that in the basement just in case I had a crop failure on my first batch. I just found that in the basement of actually in my folks' house, sealed in a canning jar. We didn't can it, but we just sealed it tight in a canning jar with a canning lid on it. It was still sitting in the basement. So I won't tell you how long ago, but it's been more than 40 years ago. That wheat was just fine. It was perfectly good. There wasn't a thing wrong with that wheat sealed in that canning jar for 40 years.
Wow.
And so it will. There's actually been grain that's grown that was found in pyramids that were, was 1,000 years old and it was still good enough to grow. So grain will store for a long, long time if you can keep it cool and dry. But the key is cool and dry, particularly dry.
Dry. Drive it home. Dry. And the other question we have, so thank you, David, for answering that.
By the way, beans are not that way. Just if you're storing beans long term, they will actually get too dry. And they will, if you store them for more than 4 or 5 years, they start to get harder to cook. So they'll take longer and longer and longer to cook. Just so you're aware, they're not like grains in the wheat family. Beans and lentils, lentils fresh will take, 20 to 45 minutes to cook, depending on how you're cooking them. Or depending on which variety of lentils. But if these were, say, 10 years old, that would probably double, maybe triple the cooking time, and you might want to soak them before you even try to cook them. Just saying. So people who have some long-term storage, have beans in your long-term storage, whether that's lentils or whether that's beans like pintos and reds and stuff, that does happen with beans over time. They harden in, and they'll still grow, they'll still sprout, but they do take longer to cook. If you just throw them in a pot and start cooking them, you're going to have to cook them a lot longer.
Yeah. So the other question actually is one that I can answer,
right.
Because it has to do with service. And so the question was, if you've admitted that the grain wasn't clean and it was your fault, why were people not given refunds? So I can answer that. Originally, we didn't give refunds because we didn't realize the extent of the matter that was in the grain, the foreign matter. We didn't realize it was above what we would consider the acceptable or allowable amount, which we share, on our website and in our with our grains,
99.5.
which is right, that 99.5. So the team was going under the understanding that it looked like it was within the range that we would expect some debris to be. And it wasn't until we learned that it was more than that range, and we didn't have a lot of reports of it at first. So when you only get a handful of reports and you look at it and it looks to be within the range, then we're going with that expectation. But as more reports came, deeper look, then we recognized, yes, there actually is a problem here. And then as folks continued to call in, then we were able to provide refunds and discounts to them based on what they
So if
wanted.
you were one of the early callers and didn't get a refund,
give us a call back.
You're welcome to call
Yes.
back now. It took a while for us to understand because it was gone. Well, we were so full in the warehouse that we had this stored. I rented a little warehouse space in Dallasport, and we had it stored there. So the rest of it,
Right.
So we didn't go look at that until
So we had enough reports. That
I
we
had
were like,
enough reports.
Maybe
We better go
should.
check this out because we couldn't. It wasn't handy. So I'm sorry about that. It was very unhandy to
Yeah.
go do, but we eventually did do that, and
And the challenge was not everybody was calling in and telling us. We had a few, here and there reports to the team,
but we do all the time,
yeah.
because of the nature of what we were just talking about.
Right.
We always get a few reports here and there.
Exactly. So a few reports doesn't really raise a flag with us, especially when it may be what looks like a small amount. The challenge becomes when folks go out on social and they report it to each other, but they actually don't report it to us. And so that's kind of what happened in this case. We just didn't have enough people telling us, but they were on private pages by themselves, what we're not a part of, or that maybe we see sometimes here and there talking to each other, but we're not necessarily privy to all of that. So it wasn't until, so that's my encouragement. If you have a problem, come to our team so that we know that there's a problem. Because if we have enough reports of something, then we're able to say, hey, we're seeing a high number of reports that we need to go look and see what's going on if it's more than what would be what we talked about today, like that normal range. So in this case, until we actually had people, more than 1 or 2 or 3 people contacting us saying, hey, it looks abnormal to me, we didn't know to go look at it. So once we knew, then we were able to go look at it and make that change. So to David's comment, yes, if you were in that early group that we didn't know at that point, and we were under the impression it was going by policy, under the impression that it was the smaller expected amount, give our team a call or send them an email and let them know, and we'll take care of that if you were part of that lot. Yes.
All right.
Thank you so much. No other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate you. We're glad we were able to talk about this today. We love answering your questions. Sometimes they're hard, and that's okay. We're not afraid of the hard stuff, and we want you to be delighted. We want to serve you and help your family eat healthy and live abundant lives and be a part of the Azure family, and we care about you. So thank you again. David, anything you want to add at the end?
Oh, no. Thank you for being a part of the Azure family and for caring about your family's health and food supply. Thank you.